Have you ever witnessed a secret so scandalous that it threatened to tear a millionaire's perfect world apart? In the blink of an eye, picture a pristine prenatal class in downtown Manhattan filled with excited mothers-to-be. Suddenly, the doors swing wide open, and in glides a shimmering black Bentley, driven by a woman who isn't the millionaire's pregnant wife. Whispers turn into gasps as a second very pregnant woman appears microphone in hand, ready to expose her husband's twisted double life. Buckle up for a story brimming with deceit, betrayal, and outrageous secrets, a tale that proves the truth will always find its way into the spotlight. James Thompson was the sort of man people admired and envied in equal measure. Born into a modest family in New Jersey, James had transcended his humble upbringing to become the charismatic CEO of a thriving tech startup in Manhattan. By age 38, he was considered a pioneer in digital security software. High-profile clients, including the city government and well-known financial institutions like Morgan Stanley, trusted his invention to keep their data safe. He had the watch, a gleaming Patek Philippe, the townhouse in Soho, and the routine appearances at philanthropic galas, frequented by real estate titan Donald Bren and the philanthropic Tisha family. Most important of all, he had a stunning wife, Clara Thompson. Clara wore her status with grace. Tall, with an elegant stride and bright copper hair that glimmered under the city lights, she had a confidence that came from growing up in an influential political family from Connecticut. She had crossed paths with James at a charity function sponsored by a dear friend of her father. Their courtship was a whirlwind of black-tie dinners and spontaneous trips to Monte Carlo. When they married in an opulent ceremony at the Plaza Hotel, the press called it the society wedding of the year. Anyone who knew them believed they were the perfect couple, the unstoppable pair. 6 years into their marriage, Clara was pregnant with their first child. People who heard the news were thrilled, particularly because it seemed like the crowning jewel on their already charmed life. From the outside looking in, James and Clara were a real-life fairy tale. But behind the bright lights and social media posts showcasing their charitable works, trouble was brewing, and it had a name: Sydney Pierce. Sydney Pierce was 26, an aspiring interior designer who had come to Manhattan from a small town in Ohio. She had big dreams of decorating penthouses for the city's elite. However, as many find out upon arrival in the Big Apple, success doesn't come simply by wishing for it. Sydney spent years juggling multiple jobs, waitressing at a high-end cocktail bar near Times Square, freelancing as a design consultant for smaller apartments, and serving as a hostess for private events. It was during one of these exclusive events, an after-party for a Broadway premiere featuring cameo appearances by the likes of Lin-Manuel Miranda and other A-listers, that Sydney first encountered James Thompson. He was seated on a plush leather sofa in the VIP lounge, swirling a crystal glass of whiskey, his tie loosened just enough to signal a man who had come to enjoy himself away from the boardroom. Sydney, in her role as hostess, had to make sure every guest was comfortable. She offered him a second drink, and the two struck up a conversation. Despite her initial impression, another wealthy businessman with a wedding ring, Sydney, found James enthralling. He spoke with the kind of passion she rarely encountered about software, about Manhattan real estate, even about the difficulties in finding the right color palette for an office lobby. She was dazzled. She couldn't remember how many times she'd been warned, "Avoid married men in this city. Their wallets may be thick, but their hearts are closed." Yet James had a way of making her feel like she had known him for years. By the end of the night, he asked for her number under the guise of wanting advice on redoing his Soho townhouse's reading room. Their first few messages seemed innocuous discussions of design samples, color schemes, and furniture budgets, but they soon escalated into late-night calls, personal confessions, and expensive dinners at 11 Madison Park. One evening, after an intimate meal, James hinted at how he felt misunderstood at home, how his marriage had grown stale. Looking back, Sydney realized that was the night she abandoned her moral compass. Though guilt nipped at her, she stepped willingly into the role of mistress. While James's affair with Sydney intensified, Clara was just beginning to glow with maternal pride. Pregnancy suited her. The first trimester's exhaustion and morning sickness gave way to a second trimester filled with excitement about designing a nursery and planning for baby showers. Clara had a regular prenatal yoga class every Thursday taught by the renowned instructor Yumi Iriguchi, who boasted celebrity clients like Gigi Hadid. In this class, Clara learned breathing techniques and positions to ease her back pain. She would often imagine James by her side supporting her, especially when the instructor prompted them to envision their partner's presence and warmth. Yet James rarely joined her. He explained with relentless politeness that his schedule was too full. Clara tried not to let it bother her, reminding herself that building a successful tech empire often demanded unrelenting hours. Whenever James missed a doctor's appointment or arrived late to a prenatal class, Clara found ways to justify it. He was doing this for the family after all, and that was what it meant to be married to a man with big dreams. In their luxurious townhouse, Clara busied herself with picking out strollers, discussing baby names Andrew or Rose if it were a girl, and shopping for crib sets from exclusive stores in Midtown. She attended charity events, silently wishing James would stand next to her, but acknowledging that public appearances were part of their image, so she couldn't openly complain. Occasionally, fleeting moments of doubt slipped through her mind. Why was James more distant? Why did he look at his phone every few minutes, texting someone with an unusual level of secrecy? But she quickly dismissed these concerns. He was a powerful CEO. Confidentiality was part of the territory. Little did she know that in a different part of Manhattan, another woman was also pregnant, and that woman was her husband's mistress. Sydney hadn't intended to become pregnant. Although her affair with James had grown in intensity, she understood that she was stepping on dangerous ground. The initial excitement of clandestine dates and lavish gifts, diamond earrings, a brand new designer handbag, was overshadowed by the reality of being the other woman. Every now and then, she glimpsed his ring and felt a sting of remorse. But whenever she tried to break things off, James would pull her back in with heartfelt promises. "I'll figure this out soon. I love you. I'm with you wholeheartedly." Then came the positive pregnancy test. Fear, panic, and a strange undercurrent of hope all collided. She told James the news on a drizzly Sunday afternoon. He was shocked, of course, but he quickly switched to reassurance. He told her he was in the process of leaving Clara, that it was only a matter of time. He promised the world to Sydney, a new apartment, with her name on the lease, monthly allowances, and a future together. Sydney tried to believe him, but as the months went by, his promises remained intangible. James never left Clara. He claimed the time wasn't right, that it would destroy Clara's health, especially since Clara was also expecting. Yet he insisted he would take care of the child financially, and he added he cared for Sydney deeply. Despite it all, it was evident that his priority was to maintain the facade of a happily married man. The turning point came when Sydney's new OB/GYN recommended a specialized prenatal class for women requiring advanced care or who simply wanted more in-depth learning about pregnancy and childbirth. James insisted on paying for the sessions at this exclusive maternal clinic on the Upper East Side. He promised to accompany her, but as with Clara, business calls, urgent deals, and unavoidable investor lunches popped up at the last minute. Sydney found herself arriving alone to each class, quietly fielding pitying glances from the other pregnant women who wondered why she didn't have a supportive partner by her side. One evening, James made a startling suggestion to make it up to her. He handed her the keys to his Bentley Bentayga, his prized luxury SUV, and told her to drive it to her next class. It was his twisted grand gesture of apology and indulgence to show how much he cared. Sydney almost refused, but the temptation to be seen even for just a moment in such an opulent car gave her a sense of empowerment she rarely felt in this entire affair. She accepted. The day Sydney decided to drive James's Bentley to her prenatal class was a crisp fall afternoon. She wore a black maternity dress with a subtle gold belt that accentuated her growing bump, and she tried to contain her nerves. She hadn't told James that she'd overheard him on the phone the night before a cryptic conversation about going public with the truth. Whether he was referring to their affair or some business matter, she couldn't be certain. But she was on edge. When she slid behind the wheel of the Bentley, she felt a rush of pride. The leather seats, the sleek dashboard, the gentle hum of the engine, everything radiated wealth and power. She found herself imagining a life where she wasn't just the other woman, but the rightful partner to a man as successful as James. The illusions danced in her mind as she drove through Manhattan's busy streets, eventually arriving at the well-appointed maternal clinic. Her classmates, some single mothers, some with their doting husbands, noticed the luxurious vehicle in the parking lot. Sydney was used to the inquisitive, sometimes envious stares by now. She gently rubbed her belly and made her way inside, feeling both excitement and dread. Little did she know, across town, Clara was also preparing for a special prenatal workshop. It was organized by the same clinic. Up until that day, Clara had stuck to her yoga classes and private sessions. But a friend had recommended the advanced workshop. The friend didn't mention it was the exact same session time that Sydney was attending. Not suspecting a thing, Clara left home in an Uber, breezing through her emails, oblivious to the thunderstorm about to strike her carefully curated life. The lounge outside the workshop's conference room was modern and comfortable, with pastel walls, cushioned seats, and cheerful posters about maternal health. As Sydney sipped some ginger tea and adjusted her dress, she sensed a presence behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with Clara Thompson. Sydney's heart pounded. Clara, though obviously pregnant, still exuded that effortless style. She wore a sophisticated wrap dress in dark green, her copper hair neatly pinned back. It was as if time slowed down. Clara didn't immediately recognize Sydney. They'd never met in person. But when Clara's gaze drifted downward to Sydney's pregnant belly and then flicked to the key fob of a Bentley in Sydney's hand, one that looked suspiciously like the customized keyring James always carried, something clicked in Clara's mind. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Clara introduced herself politely, extending her hand. Sydney managed to stammer out her name, but her voice trembled. She prayed Clara wouldn't look too closely at the distinctive JT monogram on the corner of the fob. However, Clara's eyes widened fractionally. There was a moment of awkward tension and a trace of confusion in Clara's poised expression. Before either woman could say anything more, the workshop instructor called everyone into the conference room. Inside the bright conference room, 12 pregnant women sat on floor cushions arranged in a circle. Each was handed a handheld microphone in turn to introduce themselves and share their progress. As the microphone made its way around, Clara found her mind whirling. She recalled nights when James came home late, always claiming to be at meetings. She thought of the hush in his voice when he took certain phone calls. The sight of that Bentley key fob in Sydney's hand was all too familiar. She remembered picking out that particular fob at a charity auction, monogrammed at James's request. Sydney, feeling the weight of Clara's stare, struggled to remain calm. She'd prayed that day would never come, but here it was the moment her secret threatened to unravel in front of James's unsuspecting wife and a dozen strangers. When the microphone reached Clara, she spoke confidently about how excited she was for her first baby, how she was around 6 months along, and how her husband James was busy with pressing business deals but was thrilled to be a father soon. Clara's voice only quavered slightly as she mentioned his name. She felt a confusing wave of fear, anger, and denial all at once. Could that Bentley have belonged to someone else? Was she jumping to conclusions? She concluded her introduction with a soft, forced smile. The microphone then moved to Sydney. She froze for a moment, meeting Clara's gaze. Whispered words from the instructor prodded her to speak. Clearing her throat, she finally managed, "I'm Sydney. I'm about 5 months pregnant, and the father of my child. Well, he's not here today." She paused, feeling the energy of the room. Everyone's eyes were on her. She continued, "He's in business, but yeah, he supports me however he can." She avoided mentioning a name, but she felt Clara's unwavering stare, a silent storm of accusations. The class moved on, but the atmosphere crackled with tension. Typically, the workshop ended with a group discussion, where partners, if present, might join. That day, however, the instructor informed them that a special guest speaker, a labor coach, had arrived and everyone would be offered a chance to share a microphone to discuss concerns about childbirth. Each woman would receive a brief supportive reply from the labor coach. This was meant to empower mothers and couples in the transition to parenthood. But as the labor coach stepped in and the microphone was passed around, Clara could hardly focus on the instructions. She felt like she was about to explode. The simmering suspicions were too strong now. Clara glanced again at Sydney, who kept her gaze pinned to the floor. Anger roiled inside Clara. If there was any doubt left, it vanished when she remembered how James always bragged about letting no one but himself or the dealership's valet touch his Bentley. No one, not even Clara. And yet, this woman possessed the key fob. When the microphone was in Clara's hands once more, her heart pounded. She rose to her feet, ignoring the baffled stares of the instructor and the mothers around her, and pinned her gaze on Sydney. Her voice trembled, but she forced it out. "I need to say something. My name is Clara Thompson, wife to James Thompson, the man who paid for this Bentley, I presume." She pointed at the key fob in Sydney's hand. Gasps rippled through the room, and the instructor hovered in a state of shock. Sydney's face drained of color as she trembled on her cushion. Clara continued raising the microphone, so her words rang out clearly. "You're driving my husband's car, or shall I say, our car, and you're pregnant. So I would like you to tell me right here, right now, how long has this been going on?" The entire room fell silent. A dramatic hush pulsated like thunder. Sydney's chin quivered. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The labor coach and instructor exchanged worried glances, uncertain how to intervene. Clara's voice broke. "Answer me," she demanded. Her words hung in the air. Time seemed to freeze, as every person in that prenatal class felt the magnitude of the revelation swirling around them. Sydney placed a protective hand on her belly, tears sliding down her cheeks. The illusions she'd nurtured about James, about a possible future together, shattered in that moment. There was no hiding anymore, no carefully orchestrated half-truths. She raised her eyes to Clara's tears, reflecting both guilt and fear. Her voice trembled. It started about a year ago. He told me he was unhappy, she said haltingly. He said he was leaving you. I didn't mean for this to happen. Murmurs spread through the circle of pregnant women. The tension was palpable, a shared wave of empathy and shock. Clara swayed as if physically struck by the confession. She pressed her free hand to her belly, trying to stay composed for the sake of the life inside her. Emotions flared in her eyes, betrayal, heartbreak, and sheer rage. She wanted to fling the microphone at Sydney, to scream that James had lied to them both. But the tears swelling in her eyes made it impossible to speak. Then, with a sudden burst of resolve, Clara turned on her heel and strode out of the room. Sydney sat there frozen, while the instructor hurried to follow Clara. The rest of the group, uncertain of what to do, stood in stunned silence. Clara collapsed onto a bench in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. She pressed both hands against her baby bump, inhaling shallow, shaky breaths. She wanted to wail, but the presence of onlookers forced her to restrain herself. A sympathetic nurse approached and tried to console her, but Clara waved her away. Minutes later, Sydney emerged from the room, also visibly shaken. She came to a stop, a few feet from Clara, her posture unsure. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I know nothing I say will fix this, but I never meant to." Clara shot her a venomous glare. "You never meant to what? Get pregnant, drive his car. It doesn't matter. You betrayed me." But then she remembered that the real betrayer was James. This woman before her was a symptom of James's deception, not the only culprit. She exhaled, pained eyes burning with tears. "When did you find out he was married?" she asked, voice trembling. Sydney slumped. "From the start," she admitted. "He said he was practically divorced, that you were only staying together for appearances." Clara bowed her head, tears falling to her lap. "He said that about me." It felt like a knife to her heart. Not only had James been unfaithful, but he also lied mercilessly about their marriage. A tense stillness stretched between them. At last, a staff member approached, explaining that they'd be closing the workshop soon, urging them to move to a more private space if they needed to talk. Fighting back tears, Clara stood, ignoring Sydney's pleas. She needed time to think, to decide what to do. The only certainty was that her picture-perfect life was in ruins. The entire taxi ride back to her townhouse was a blur. Clara stared out the window, 1,000 thoughts colliding. She recalled the vow renewal James had mentioned just a week before. He had even floated the idea of going on a baby moon to the Maldives. How could he speak of romantic escapes while hiding such a betrayal? That night, Clara prepared for a showdown. She waited in the living room, ignoring her phone buzzing with messages from well-wishers and acquaintances who probably had no idea what was unfolding in her life. The only messages she opened were from James, a few polite texts stating he'd be late and not to wait up for dinner. At around 10 p.m., James finally walked through the door. He looked tired, perhaps from another endless day of negotiations. He loosened his tie, ready to greet Clara with a routine kiss, only to meet her furious gaze. She launched immediately, voice trembling but resolute. "Were you with her, Sydney Pierce?" James froze. His expression went slack for a moment. "Clara, what? I saw her today at my prenatal class. She had your Bentley key fob." James, Clara hissed. "She's pregnant 5 months along. She says it's yours. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? James's mouth opened and closed, but no words formed. The color drained from his face. The heavily staged excuses and denials he might have planned for a different day dissolved in front of Clara's unwavering rage and heartbreak. Finally, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I never wanted you to find out this way, he said, voice muffled. Clara's anger flared. You never wanted me to find out at all, you mean? How long have you been lying to me? Slowly, James raised his head. His eyes brimmed with guilt and sorrow, but also a strange resignation. About a year, he admitted softly. It started as a fling, but then she got pregnant. Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks, unstoppable now. She pressed a hand to her stomach. You have no idea what you've done to me. To us. I was here planning our child's nursery, dreaming about a future with you while you threw it all away. She wanted to scream, to fling something at him, but she also felt heartbreak overshadowing her rage. She loved the man, she married this man, who had built a life with her. Yet now, she questioned if she even recognized him. James tried to console her, reaching out, but Clara recoiled. Don't touch me, she warned. He spoke in a low, desperate tone. I won't deny the affair. It was a mistake. But you have to believe I love you, Clara. I was going to end it. I was trying to figure out how not to destroy our family. Clara's laughter was hollow, laced with bitterness. Our family? We're not a family if you're living a double life, James. She exhaled shakily, wiping her tears. You know for all your success, you're nothing but a coward. James's face contorted with shame. He clenched his fists, seeming at war with himself. After a moment, he finally spoke words that stunned Clara. I think I should go. For now. It might be better if you have space. She glared at him, her voice cutting. Where will you go? Her apartment. He swallowed hard. No, I'll get a hotel room. He stood up, removing his tie completely. I'll give you time to figure out what you want. Clara snorted bitterly. Me, figure out what I want. So you still think you call the shots here? James looked pained. This is tearing me apart. I don't want to lose you, but I also have a responsibility to Sydney and the baby she's carrying. Clara, eyes welling up again, turned away. Just leave, James. We'll talk when I'm ready. He nodded, his voice trembling. Clara, I'm sorry. She didn't respond, maintaining a stoic silence as he packed a small bag and walked out into the night. The door clicked shut, with a finality that left Clara numb and alone in the echoing townhouse. Days turned into a week of uncertainty. Clara wrestled with her betrayal, torn between heartbreak and the desire to protect her unborn child from scandal. The media had yet to catch wind of the affair. James's PR team was adept at keeping rumors at bay, but the tension within their circle of friends and high society connections was palpable. Sydney, on the other hand, found her life thrown into chaos. James had cut back on his visits, citing the emotional toll of the confrontation with Clara. While he promised to support her financially, Sydney sensed he was reluctant to commit to anything beyond money. It enraged her. She began to question everything, the illusions James had spun, her own fantasies, and most of all, her future as a single mother in an expensive city. One afternoon, as she sat in her tiny, sparsely furnished apartment in Astoria, a friend called with an unexpected tip. There's this invitation-only charity gala tomorrow. James's startup is listed as a sponsor. Clara might also be there. Sydney's heart pounded. To show up uninvited would be unthinkable. But a rebellious part of her, a part that was done hiding, felt a pull. She was tired of being invisible, used, left in the shadows, while James presented himself as the respectable CEO husband. If James wouldn't stand by her, maybe it was time to force the truth out in the open. The gala took place at a five-star hotel just off Central Park. The event was a fundraiser for children's literacy, attended by top executives, socialites, and occasional celebrities like Kris Jenner, or even philanthropic entrepreneurs like Bill Gates. Clara arrived with her mother, maintaining a stoic front for the cameras. James was notably absent. Rumor had it he was in back-to-back investor meetings. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers lit up circular tables draped in satin. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, and a silent auction showcased everything from exclusive artworks to extravagant vacation packages. Clara tried to focus on small talk with acquaintances, but she was in a haze. Every question, "How's James?" or "When is the baby due?" felt like a sting. Then, amid the swirl of evening gowns and tuxedos, Clara's gaze locked onto a figure stepping tentatively into the ballroom, Sydney Pierce. Dressed in a form-fitting navy gown that highlighted her pregnant belly, Sydney looked both determined and terrified. The chatter around them died down as more people recognized the tension building between these two pregnant women. Clara's mother, noticing the shift, turned her gaze and recognized Sydney from word-of-mouth gossip. "Is that?" she began. "Yes." Clara managed her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to flee. The other part felt an adrenaline surge, ready for a confrontation. Sydney approached with measured steps, ignoring curious stares. When she drew near, she was immediately blocked by one of the event organizers, who insisted this was an invitation-only function. But Sydney loudly proclaimed that James Thompson was her partner, and she should have every right to be there. Clara watched the scene, a swirl of conflicting emotions twisting her stomach. When the event organizer looked to Clara for confirmation, Clara hesitated. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to say something. "Let her in," Clara finally said, her voice taut. "I want to hear what she has to say." The band's music had quieted into near silence as all eyes turned toward the two women. Sydney stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "I'm sorry for coming here," she said in a shaky voice, "but James refused to see me. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Clara stared at Sydney for several seconds. Then, in a voice resonating with quiet authority, she said, "There's a side room near the stage. Let's talk in private." The crowd parted as Clara led Sydney into a small function room next to the ballroom. Clara's mother wanted to follow, but Clara shook her head, indicating she needed to do this alone. Behind them, hushed whispers and speculative glances rippled through the assembled guests. Once inside the smaller room, Clara shut the door. The muffled sounds of the gala filtered through the walls. She turned to face Sydney. "Why are you here to humiliate me further, in public?" Sydney looked down, rubbing a hand over her belly. "I'm not here to humiliate you, I feel abandoned. James barely speaks to me. He's juggling you, your baby, me and mine. And I can't keep living in the shadows. This is my life, my future too." Clara felt a begrudging pang of sympathy. She recalled the heartbreak she'd felt learning of James's betrayal. Now it dawned on her that Sydney had also been manipulated and left with false promises. For a few heartbeats, the two women stood, an invisible bond forming. They were both carrying James's children. They had both been lied to. Clara cleared her throat. "You do realize that your presence here could start a scandal?" one that might overshadow this entire event. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for the tabloids, the gossip columns to devour us? Sydney's lip trembled, but she nodded. I don't have a choice. I can't afford this city alone. If James won't support me emotionally, if he's going to disappear, I at least need him to be accountable publicly so I can provide for my child. Clara inhaled a shaky breath. She realized that as the wife she had power, in this situation power, to ostracize Sydney or to stand up for her. If she demanded that Sydney be thrown out, the scandal might still leak, but in a more chaotic, destructive form. A different approach might give Clara some control over what happened next. She looked at Sydney, tears in her eyes. You're carrying his child. He won't be able to ignore that forever. So what do you propose? Sydney swallowed hard. I want James to hold a press conference. I want him to acknowledge us and provide clarity on how he plans to support both children. The audacity of the request made Clara reel. She imagined the humiliating headlines. Still, a small, determined voice inside her head reminded her that a press conference might be exactly the leverage she needed. James would be forced to confront his lies head-on, forced to pick a path, forced to give Clara closure, rather than dragging her through indefinite agony. She exhaled slowly. Fine. We'll do this. But on my terms. I will be the one to decide where and when James faces the music. Because one thing is clear, this has gone too far. Within a week, a press event was planned in a private lounge at a midtown hotel famously used for corporate announcements, but also for more personal public statements by celebrities. Rumors circulated wildly within Manhattan society. The invitation described it simply as a personal statement from James Thompson. Journalists from the New York Times, Page 6, and various tabloids flocked to the venue. That morning, Clara dressed in a tasteful navy suit with a modest necklace. She looked poised despite the roiling storm within her. By her side was her mother, offering silent support. Sydney arrived shortly after wearing a simple cream maternity dress. The tension between the two women was palpable, but they stood on the same side of the battle line. Now, both had been wronged. James was late. The media was already buzzing in the lounge cameras, flashing at the slightest movement. Clara felt her anger build with each passing second. Finally, the elevator doors slid open, and James stepped out with a team of PR strategists and attorneys. He looked haggard, his once confident posture slackened by the weight of the scandal about to unfold. Clara walked up to him, leaning in. "You're late," she said, icily. James exhaled, glancing at Sydney. "I'm sorry." The attorneys were going over statements. He offered to speak privately with them before going on stage, but Clara refused. "We've done enough secret discussions. We're doing this publicly so no one can twist the truth." The stage was a simple podium with a row of chairs behind it, enough for James, Clara, Sydney, and the legal representatives. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. James cleared his throat, stepping behind the podium cameras, immediately clicking and reporters whispering. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice shaky. "I have asked you here today to clarify recent events in my personal life." Clara and Sydney exchanged anxious glances. James continued, James Thompson need to acknowledge a serious breach of trust. I have been unfaithful to my wife Clara Thompson, and this affair has resulted in a second pregnancy with Ms. Sydney Pierce." A sudden roar of camera flashes exploded. Reporters jockeyed for the best angle microphones thrust forward. Gasps and murmurs rippled around the room. James tried to maintain composure. "I offer my apologies to both women, my wife, who has stood by me, and Ms. Pierce, who has also carried the burden of my choices. I will be providing financial support for Ms. Pierce's child, and I remain committed to supporting my wife and our expected child. I take full responsibility for my actions. James stumbled over his next words. I ask for privacy as we navigate this complicated situation and figure out the best path forward for our children. I will not be taking questions at this time. Suddenly, Clara stood and walked up to the podium, surprising James and the reporters. She took the microphone. I have something to say, she said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with resolve. She glanced at James, then addressed the audience of reporters. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a woman who has discovered the depths of betrayal and has survived it. While I'm devastated by my husband's actions, my priority is, and always will be, my child's well-being. She inhaled tears, shining. I won't deny this is painful, but I'll do everything in my power to rise above the betrayal for the sake of my unborn baby. And though it may shock you, I stand with Ms. Pierce in demanding James be accountable for both children. I hope that by standing together, we can ensure that these innocent lives are provided for, and that we as women are no longer forced into hiding when men refuse to face their responsibilities. The room was silent, stunned. Sydney, tears on her cheeks, slowly nodded in support, stepping to Clara's side. The cameras captured the remarkable emotional image, two pregnant women standing together unified in a demand for accountability. In the aftermath, the media went wild. Tabloids labeled the story the Manhattan Love Triangle, while more reputable outlets ran features on the complexities of modern marriage trust and the rights of women in extramarital affairs. Social media exploded, with hashtags, some condemning James, others picking apart every detail of Clara's expression or Sydney's body language. James attempted to keep a low profile. His startup's board members were concerned about the scandal's effect on investors. Some, like Morgan Stanley, were worried about the firm's public image. Meanwhile, employees felt uneasy about the moral character of their CEO. At an all-staff meeting, James apologized for the distractions, promising it wouldn't affect the company's performance. However, rumors swirled that certain shareholders wanted him replaced as CEO. As for Clara, she moved out of their shared townhouse, returning to her family's Connecticut estate to regroup. Surrounded by her mother and close friends, she contemplated divorce. Part of her still remembered the man she fell in love with, but she wasn't naive enough to believe things could go back to the way they were. She began meeting with a top divorce attorney recommended by family friend Michael Feinberg, who had worked with political and celebrity clients alike. Sydney used the financial support James provided to move into a slightly larger apartment and prepare for motherhood on her own terms. She wasn't sure if she wanted James involved beyond the check. The heartbreak and betrayal still stung, yet she also knew she wanted her child to know its father at least in some capacity. She consulted with a counselor, trying to figure out how to navigate the complicated reality of sharing parental rights with a married man. Months passed, and Clara's baby was born prematurely a month ahead of schedule. The early labor sent shockwaves of worry through both families. James rushed to the hospital and found Clara in the delivery room, her mother by her side, her face contorted in pain. Despite Clara's anger toward James, she allowed him to be present for the birth. In a surreal moment, as Clara screamed and the doctors encouraged her to push, James clung to her hand. Their baby boy, Andrew Thomas Thompson, arrived in a flurry of urgent voices and tears. For a brief moment, James and Clara locked eyes, a silent exchange of raw emotion. This was the life they had created, a beautiful, fragile newborn who would forever connect them. Tears streamed down both of their faces. Then just as quickly the moment passed. Clara turned away, letting the nurse and her mother take over. 3 weeks later, Sydney also went into labor. James was once again summoned. He stood in the hospital corridor, feeling a strange déjà vu. While he had once dreamt of fathering a child, now he was fathering two under the most dramatic, heartbreaking circumstances. Sydney's labor was long and difficult, culminating in the birth of a baby girl, Maya Pearl Pierce. James held his daughter in his arms, tears of conflicted joy running down his cheeks. He looked over at Sydney, who was pale with exhaustion. She offered him a tired smile. "She deserves better than all these lies," she whispered. The weeks that followed were an emotional labyrinth. James spent his days shuttling between two different hospital nurseries, one where Andrew needed extra care due to his premature status, and another where Maya had just come home. He felt a swirl of guilt, love, and confusion. How could he juggle two broken relationships, two newborns, and a crumbling professional life? Clara, recovering from the stress of a premature delivery, contemplated the future. When she looked into Andrew's innocent eyes, she felt a fierce protectiveness. She didn't want him to grow up amidst a parental tug-of-war. She also recognized that her heart might never fully forgive James. Nevertheless, for the sake of stability, Clara allowed James limited visitation. She was cordial, but distant, unwilling to entertain the idea of reconciliation. "We can work on a parenting agreement," she insisted, "but as far as we are concerned, I can't see us repairing this marriage." James, tears shining in his eyes, understood. It was the price of his actions, the slow, painful dissolution of everything they had built. He started therapy on the advice of a friend, wanting at least to be a decent father to Andrew and Maya, even if his relationships with Clara and Sydney were irreparably damaged. Sydney, meanwhile, was grappling with single motherhood. She accepted James's financial support, but limited his visits to a schedule. In time, she found solace in a single mom support group, forging friendships that helped her cope with the emotional fallout. She also secured a part-time role at a small interior design firm, aiming to slowly build her career. 2 years passed. The media frenzy eventually died down, overshadowed by the next big scandal in New York. James stepped down as CEO of his startup, citing a desire to focus on family. Rumor had it that certain investors gave him the nudge, but officially he remained on the board, collecting dividends while exploring new ventures more quietly. Clara finalized her divorce. In the settlement, she received generous alimony and child support. She relocated to a condo in Upper West Side, chosen for its good schools and proximity to her mother. Little Andrew grew stronger every day, filling Clara's world with laughter and purpose. She found new meaning in philanthropic work, championing initiatives that supported single mothers and women facing betrayal, her personal mission shaped by her own experiences. Sydney continued her interior design journey, juggling motherhood with a growing roster of clients. Maya was a spirited toddler, curious about the world. James visited every other weekend, taking Maya to Central Park or museums, then driving across town to spend time with Andrew. As awkward as it was, James tried to create a semblance of normalcy for his children. Two half-siblings born under extraordinary circumstances. Sometimes on special occasions, like birthdays, a strange, uneasy kind of unity would form. Clara, her mother, Andrew, James, Sydney, and Maya might appear at the same party. The atmosphere was far from cheerful harmony. It was more like a tenuous truce. But in those moments, Clara and Sydney would exchange fleeting smiles, acknowledging their shared journey from that fateful day at the prenatal class to their present realities. Each carried emotional scars, but they had survived. Time has a way of blurring pain into memory, but some moments, some choices never fade. For Clara and Sydney, that defining moment in the prenatal class, the microphone, the confrontation, the silence that followed remained etched into their lives like a scar that didn't ache but never quite healed. Looking back, both women came to realize that the real turning point wasn't when the truth came out in the tabloids or even when James made his public apology. It was that one raw instant when Clara stood up, voice trembling with rage and heartbreak, and demanded truth in front of strangers. That single act broke the illusion. It forced open the door to everything that followed, reckoning, heartbreak, but ultimately transformation. Clara's decision to speak up not only gave her clarity in her own life, but inspired others. That moment gave birth to Speak Up for Mothers, the foundation she created, not out of vengeance, but necessity. She knew there were countless women silently navigating betrayals, single pregnancies, emotional manipulation, or public shame. Women who needed to know that silence was not strength, that their voices mattered. The foundation quickly gained momentum. With a dedicated team and Clara's leadership, it offered everything from legal aid and prenatal support to counseling and emergency housing. Clara, who once had to pretend everything was perfect for the cameras, now stood in front of those same lenses, advocating for change. She gave speeches in state capitals and on university stages, her voice steady, her presence commanding. Her past wasn't something she hid from, it was what gave her message power. To everyone's surprise, Sydney didn't shrink away from that spotlight. After months of therapy, self-reflection, and hard lessons, she joined the foundation, not as a figurehead, but as a voice for young women who, like her, had been promised love only to be discarded in the shadows. Her sessions were raw and honest. She didn't hide the mistakes she made or the warning signs she ignored. She shared them so others wouldn't have to make the same missteps. Sydney's journey wasn't about redemption in the public eye, it was about personal truth. Volunteering gave her a purpose that design alone couldn't fulfill. She often said that while James had shattered her self-worth, Speak Up for Mothers helped her piece it back together. The Foundation's events became safe havens for honesty. Women laughed, cried, raged, and healed together. And in the center of it all were two women, once adversaries, now pillars of strength for others. Even when their personal interactions remained brief and businesslike, Clara and Sydney shared something unspoken, a bond formed in fire. They didn't need to be friends. They didn't need to agree on everything. But they had both walked through humiliation, heartbreak, and public judgment and emerged not as victims, but as architects of something enduring. And so the microphone became more than a symbol of confrontation. It became a legacy, a call to all women everywhere to seize their moment and speak loud, clear, and without apology. In the years that followed, James remained a father, but no longer a central figure in society's glimmering spotlight. The aura he once carried, the golden boy of Manhattan's tech world, had dimmed, replaced by whispered pity and half-hearted handshakes at networking events. Though he stayed on the board of his company, his public image never fully recovered. For every philanthropic gesture or business panel appearance, there lingered a shadow, the scandal that shattered two women's lives and laid bare his betrayal. Clara, no longer living in the shadows of a curated marriage, found new dimensions of herself she'd never had time to explore. Freed from the constant balancing act of appearances and emotional restraint, she discovered strength in her own voice. Her memoir, Broken Vows, Stronger Hearts, quickly became a sensation, an unfiltered account of pain, dignity, and reclaiming power. Endorsed by voices like Oprah Winfrey and discussed in women's circles and book clubs across the country, Clara's story became a beacon for those navigating betrayal, motherhood, and identity. Her foundation, Speak Up for Mothers, flourished. What had begun as a response to heartbreak became a powerful platform for advocacy. Clara found herself mentoring other women, sitting on panels, and even addressing lawmakers on maternal support and women's rights. She wasn't just healing, she was leading. Sydney, too, rose from the ashes. Her life, once entangled in secrecy and second-guessing, was now filled with color, independence, and light. She moved into a sunlit loft in Chelsea, each room a reflection of her growth as an interior designer, and as a woman who had learned the cost of losing herself in someone else's promises. Maya, her daughter, grew up in a world where her mother's strength was never in doubt. Sydney no longer flinched when people mentioned James. She had redefined herself on her own terms. Andrew and Maya, half-siblings by blood, but companions by heart, saw each other regularly. Their lives unfolded in parallel separate homes, different routines, but shared birthdays, museum trips, and family photos that told a new kind of story. One not about a broken home, but about resilience and unconventional unity. Clara and Sydney met from time to time, mostly at foundation events or joint appearances that required the presence of both founders. Their conversations were polite, professional, tinged with a formality neither of them could quite shed. Yet beneath that was something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement. They had once been rivals, caught in the same storm, but had chosen to face it with strength instead of hatred. And so the story of the mistress who drove the millionaire's Bentley to a prenatal class and the pregnant wife who seized the microphone was whispered about in Manhattan's elite circles for years to come. But outside of the gossip, it stood as a testament to two women who refused to let a man's betrayal define their futures, a testament to the courage it takes to speak up when silence is easier, and most of all, a testament to the power of reclaiming one's voice, no matter how scandalous the setting. Sometimes the greatest storms in our lives strike without warning, exposing all our hidden vulnerabilities. In this turbulent tale, Clara and Sydney learnt the power of taking control and speaking up, whether it was gripping the microphone in a prenatal class or confronting a millionaire desperate to hide his deception. Their experiences remind us that betrayal and scandal can forge surprising alliances, ultimately teaching us to seek authenticity and justice over silence. If you found this story compelling, we invite you to join our journey and help us grow. Please like this video, share it with your friends or family who might relate to Clara and Sydney's trials, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the raw, real, and sometimes shocking truths of human relationships. After all, the more voices we have, the louder our collective call for honesty and accountability can become.